frameworks. At a company where I used to work, we actually were using Backbone.js, and the senior engineers on our front-end team decided that they wanted to switch over to React. So they were a little bit like this. Oh my God, React. And when I saw React, I was like, what is that? And they were like, it's components. Lots of components. And I was like, what is that? What is a component? Because this was many years ago, and so I was like, I don't know what that is. And they were like, well, nothing stops this train. Nothing stops this React train, and it's just going to go, and we're going to use React, and we're going to do it. And everyone knows that nothing stops the React train, kind of like nothing stops the Facebook train. So when I started using React, I was like, what even is React? How can I learn more about this? So naturally, I started by going to React's website. So here you can see their homepage and a bunch of different documentation, a lot of information. Back when I started, there was a ton, but they didn't have like a ton on the inner workings of React, and so what I was getting was kind of more of a baseline of how to use React. And what they say is that React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. They have 3 points on their homepage. Number one, they say that React is declarative. They say that React will efficiently update and render just the right components when your data changes. Declarative views make your code more predictable and easier to debug. And I was like, that sounds pretty good. The next thing they say is that React is component-based. They say that you can build encapsulated components that manage their own state, then compose them to make complex UIs. And I was like, okay, that's kind of what the senior engineers were saying. It's components. And for anyone who's not yet sick of the Lego analogy, you can think of components as Legos. And then they also say that you can learn React once and write it anywhere. They say that they don't make any assumptions about the rest of your technology stack, so you can develop new features in React without rewriting existing code. And then you can also render on the server side using Node and power mobile apps using React Native. And I was like, well, we're not going to be using React Native, so all right, I guess that's fine. And I also noticed that they said specifically, you can use React without rewriting existing code. But I was like literally rewriting existing code at that point in time because we were switching frameworks. So I kind of felt like this, like, all right, whatever you say. But because nothing stops the React train, I started plugging away. So what are some of the confusing things about React when I got started? Well, honestly, I would forget that React was just JavaScript. Because when you talk about React, or when people would talk about React to me, they would talk about components, or JSX, or the virtual DOM. And I was like, but we're talking about React, so what is React? And then I remembered, oh yeah, React is open source, so I can find all of the source code on GitHub. So here we find Facebook's page and their repository React. So let's take a look at that. And you can see it's a list of packages here. So there's actually a package called React, which you can see here. And so we'll start by taking a look at the React package and a file called react.js. So here you can see that file. And then here is the code. The colors are a little funny. Hopefully you can see it okay. But this is this file, react.js. It's like a bunch of imports and some other things. And then at the bottom, you can see it's an export default React. And that's literally all that React is. And I was like, okay, that's not so bad. So it's time to get your hard hats on. Hopefully they passed out hard hats on the way in. Everyone have their hard hats? Everyone's looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? But we're going to do some code spelunking. Okay, so we have react.js, and you can see at the top of the page there are a bunch of different imports. So lots of imports of different files and modules that exist inside of this React package. And then below that, you see this const React being assigned to this thing, which is held by curly braces. And I realized, wait, React is just an object. That's it. So now that we know what React is, that's the end of the talk. Just kidding. We kind of know what React is. So let's look at the basis of React. And what is that? React elements. Okay, so if we want to create an element and append it to the DOM in JavaScript, we can do it this way. So here I'm creating a root element with the ID root. I create another element that is a div. I give it some text content. I give it a class name called protest/div. And then I append it to that original root element. So if we want to do the exact same thing in React, this is what it looks like. Again, I create an element with an ID root. And then I use this React method called createElement. And I assign it a type div, a class name protest div, and then some content, some text content. And then I use this thing called render to render that element inside of our root element. So if we look at these two things side by side, we can see that the exact same thing is happening. It's pretty straightforward. And so I wondered when I started doing this, if that's the case, what's the point of having this React.createElement? So React.createElement, where does it come from? Let's take a closer look. So here we see we do an import of createElement from this package or module called ReactElement. So we're going from React packages, React source, React.js to the same folder, but we're going to go look at a file called ReactElement.js. And here we can see the function createElement. So it's not too long, or it's a little long. So to focus on the key points here, we can see that we're actually exporting this function, createElement, which takes in a type, config, and children. And then we return this thing called a React element. So what is a React element? Let's take an even closer look. So in the same file, reactelement.js, we're taking a look at React element, and we can see in the initial comments at the top that they say that React element is a factory method to create a new React element. And here we can see actually this constant, React element, which is actually just a function here. So this is the factory code that we're talking about. And inside of that function, we can see this thing called const element. So what is this element? And again, we see curly braces, and then I realized, oh yeah, a React element, it's just another object. But what are all of those properties that live inside of this React element object? And I like to say it's the React magic. So some of the built-in properties that exist on a React element that you don't get with a typical DOM node is a type. Well, you get a type, typically, but you also have key, ref, and props. And this is like what makes React React. But we're just kind of scratching the surface of React here. And we've actually come a little bit full circle. So again, we have this function, createElement, and it takes in type, config, and children. And then below that, you can actually see the element that I created earlier. And you can see it's taking in the type div, the config object, which has things like a class name, and then also the children. So for me, it's this string here. So now we've gone from React.createElement in React.js to React.createElement inside of ReactElement.js to React element in ReactElement.js, just to create this React element. But guess what? There's an easier way. JSX. Woo! So when I started to look for JSX, I was like, okay, I'm going to look for some documentation here, and we actually see there's this thing called JSX and it's a faster, safer, easier JavaScript. And it says, JSX is a statically typed, object-oriented programming language designed to run on modern web browsers. And I was like, wait a second, is that right? Turns out this is not the JSX we're looking for. So if you keep looking for JSX, you can actually find a GitHub page by Facebook, and here you can see that there's a draft JSX specification, and this is actually the one that we are looking for. So interestingly, as I was poking around the first JSX repo, I noticed there is this issue that says JSX does not have a mascot or a logo. And they really thought this was a big problem. So then they were commenting like, oh, maybe we could have this logo, this mascot. That's this big fish. And then someone came up with this picture for JSX. So I don't think the Facebook JSX has a logo either. So we could also, if anyone works at Facebook, maybe you want to grab this logo before the other JSX does. Anyways, so what we're actually talking about is JavaScript XML. So it's an XML-like syntax extension to ECMAScript. In other words, JSX is just syntactic sugar for calling React.createElement. And we all love syntactic sugar in JavaScript. So basically what it's saying is that anything you can do with JSX can be done with just plain JavaScript. So the way I like to think about it is like JSX versus JavaScript. They're both kind of like whatever you can do, I can actually do it better. So how does React and JSX, how do they work together? React actually comes with a default set of syntax transformers, and those ship with Babel. So digging around Babel a little bit, I wanted to know more about how React and JSX and Babel all work together. And you can actually find documentation on the Babel plugin transform React JSX. So here you can see all of the information you need about how Babel actually will transpile JSX into React. I noticed actually yesterday I was looking at the newer version of the documentation. So this is an older version, and you can see that they link to both WTF is JSX, which is a great article explaining what JSX is. And then they also talk about using React without JSX, which is a possibility, and it links directly to React's documentation in case for some reason you didn't want to use JSX. But the new documentation does not have those links, so just want to point those two things out. Another thing that you want to think about if you are going to use JSX with React is that don't forget about React. So since JSX compiles to calls to React.createElement, the React library must always be in the scope of your JSX code. So I'd say don't you forget about React. Okay, so let's take a look at transpile JSX. So we're going to look at a Babel transpilation of our original React element that we created earlier, Mr., Mrs., or mix protestive. So you can see here I've written it in JSX on the left side. You can see I've got a class name, and then I've got my string, it's a div, and then you can see it's transpiled directly into what I created earlier, which is a call to React.createElement. So one thing that I noted, and that all of my coworkers noted to me when I first started using React, is that if you're going to use class name, you have to use camel case class name in JSX. So they were like, oh, there are these things, protected words. So since JSX is much closer to JavaScript than it is to HTML, React DOM actually uses camel case property naming conventions instead of HTML attribute names. So I was like, I wonder what other protected words exist here. And eventually looking around, I was able to find it. So inside of the React DOM package, there's this file called possible standard names, which is an object. And we can see here all of the protected words that exist. It's a lot. Lots and lots of protection for these words. Okay. So those are all of the protected words, and this file is like 500 lines of code. So we know Facebook really likes to protect their words, like they like to protect their money, but maybe not our privacy. Anyways, so those are protected words inside of JSX. Another thing that was interesting to me was with JSX, when I first started to use it, it was at the time when ES6 had just come out. And so I would see curly braces and be like, what are these curly braces? And I often would get them confused with template literals because there were so many new things that were happening all at the same time. So it was kind of like Urkel and just looking around like, what are these curly braces? But you can actually find that in Facebook's documentation on their GitHub page as well. So you can see here from the documentation that inside of curly braces lives either an assignment expression or a child expression. So basically what you can do is you can use JavaScript expressions inside of JSX or as children inside of React. So in other words, inside of the curly braces is JavaScript living in a JSX world. So the curly braces are like, we're living in a JSX world, and I'm a JavaScript girl. Okay, so now that we have an easier way of using React.createElement, let's make some components. All right, so React components. So I wanted to look up what a React component was as well, and we can see inside of that same file that we were looking at originally, there is an import of a component from this file called React base classes. So here inside React base classes, there's this function component. And if we take a look at this code, basically what a component does is it takes in some props, context, and updater. And so a React component is basically like, give me my props. I want some props. So here we can see our original element which we created earlier. So this is a React element. And what I've done here is I've actually rewritten it as a component. So this is a class component inside of React. And what we're doing is we're actually rendering some JSX, and we have this prop called chant, which is our original string. So when we actually create an instance of this component, which I title an element, we actually can set this prop chant on that. And before, when I had a shorter version of this talk, I used to be like, okay, there's no time to talk about state, but we know that the difference between, or the main difference between a React component versus a React element is the existence of state on the React component. So now we actually have time, so let's talk about React state. When we talk about React state, one of the main things we talk about is this method setState, which is constantly used when you're using React. And so I was like, okay, I want to know a little bit more about what setState is actually doing. So again, back inside of this file, React base classes, where our component lives, we actually can find more information about setState. So here you can see a bunch of comments at the beginning of this setState function. If we scroll down a little bit, you can see that we're actually setting this method setState on the prototype of a React component. So some of the things that I found interesting, particularly about this file, is that there is this long set of comments that talk about what this setState method is doing. And to kind of break it down a little bit, I just have these bullet points here with some notes on state. And what they do is they explain to you how to use setState. Number one, they say that setState sets only a subset of the state instead of the entire state. That you should treat this .state as immutable. So basically what we're saying here is that we shouldn't set the global state directly. And as we know, if we look in React documentation, you are supposed to use, it's an anti-pattern not to use this method setState. So this is essentially what they're saying in the comments as well. The next thing that they say is that there's no guarantee that this .state will be immediately updated. So you never know when your state may be updated when you're making calls to setState, which is something we're probably used to using JavaScript. There's also no guarantee that calls to setState will run synchronously. And again, something we're used to with JavaScript. We don't actually know when our setState calls will be run. Will they be run in order or will they not be? And then lastly, they say that your function may be called after receive props, but before should component update. And I was like, what are those two things? So I started looking around the Facebook React repository for this thing called receive props. And actually, if you do a search for that inside of this repository, there's this thing called receive props, but it's actually in the comments that we were just looking at. And that's the only instance of receive props I could find. So if anyone works at Facebook or is working on React, I think some documentation might need to be updated. So looking a little bit more, I was like, well, what else exists with this phrase receive props in it? And so I found this other thing, which is this class called will receive props. But this actually exists in a test. And again, this is the only iteration of will receive props I could find in the entire repository. I was like, that's strange. So looking a little bit further, there's actually more instances of this thing called component will receive props. And so most of the instances of it exist in tests, but I was able to find one instance in this package called React Reconciler in a file called React Fiber class component. So here we see it being called on this instance. And if we look at this function, it exists inside of this function called call component will receive props. So if we look at actually this function a little bit, the main thing that it's doing here is that if the instance of the state does not equal old state, so basically if we have like new state, what we're actually going to do here is we're going to enqueue this replace state. So we're going to enqueue the replacement of our old state with our new state here. And that's kind of the main thing that call component will receive props will do. But then if you dig into the documentation on React a little bit more, it turns out that actually this is a deprecated lifecycle method. So you should probably not use it. And that's probably why it was so hard to find in the repository. Okay, so the next thing I was looking for was this thing called should component update. And if we dig around in that same file inside of the React Reconciler, we see should component update inside of this function called check should component update. So here's this function. And if we scroll down to the bottom, basically what we're doing here is we're returning this Boolean called should update. So it's basically telling us if we should update our component or not. And that's when set state happens. It happens between whether or not you are receiving your props and then whether or not your component should update. So one thing I found interesting as well is between these two methods, or these lifecycle methods we're taking a look at inside of the same file, both of the things are called on this thing called instance. So it's like, well, what's the instance? What is this thing? And we can see further up inside of this method, check should component update, we have this constant called instance, and it's set to this thing, work in progress.state node. So I was like, well, what's work in progress then? And we can see further up inside of that file, what it's being set to is fiber. So we know that the work in progress is fiber, and I'm going to talk about fiber in a little bit. But then I was like, well, what's the state node of fiber? And I was able to find this article on this website called In Depth by Maxim Koretsky. The article is called Inside Fiber. But basically what he says is that the state node of fiber holds a reference to the class instance of a component, a DOM node, or other React element type associated with the fiber node. In general, we can say that this property is used to hold the local state associated with a fiber. So I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. It's this thing that's going to hold on to our state before we decide to update it. I'm going to talk about fiber in a little bit, for those of you who are not aware of what fiber is. So don't worry, we will get in our daily dose of fiber. Okay, so all of that is to say we have this component and we can actually put state on this component. So I actually I added a state to this protest div, now protest component, and I actually have a state. Are we in an emergency state? Yes, we are. We're also in a police state. So if we scroll down, we actually, on the component mounting, we actually can set the state to be a police state to be false. And then inside of our div, we actually ask the question, are we in a state of emergency and are we in a police state? And then we'll return based on the state that exists inside of this component. Okay, so now that we have some props and some state on our component, let's render it to the DOM. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at React DOM. So there are a bunch of packages, and we can see one of them is React DOM, lots and lots and lots of React packages. And when I first started using React, I was like, why are there so many packages? Why is there React, and there's also React DOM, and like all of these other packages? Can't we just have like one React package? And then I realized, well, actually abstraction is important in coding. So that is why we have a React DOM package. So, React DOM. We see here the documentation of the React DOM package, and below what I was looking at inside of the README was that they basically have a very short little piece on what the API is. And so we see here we're actually going to focus on React/DOM, and we're actually going to focus specifically on the render method inside of the client piece of React DOM. So we find that actually inside of a client folder and then a file called react.dom.js. Facebook is clearly very creative in their naming. So, okay, here is our render method. So we see in our render method what it does, it takes in an element, a container, and a callback, and then it returns this thing called legacy render subtree in a container. And I was like, what is that thing? So we're still inside of our React DOM file, and we actually can find this thing called legacy render subtree in a container. And it turns out it's a function which takes in a bunch of different things. And then it actually, what it does is it returns this thing called DOM_renderer.getPublicRootInstance. And I was like, what is the DOM renderer? And you can see at the top of that file that we're importing everything from DOM renderer, and that actually comes from a file or folder called React-Reconciler, which is something we were looking at a little bit earlier. And that actually is in a file called inline.dom.js. And all that file is doing is exporting everything from the React Fiber reconciler. So I was like, what is a React Fiber reconciler? And that's actually all that React is. So in this article by Ryan Jurkinen on Free Code Camp, he says that React Fiber is an internal engine change. So that's basically what Fiber is. And I was like, but what is the reconciler? And what he says about the reconciler is that React will walk through the virtual tree, find what's changed, and update as little as it can. So this could mean updating one class attribute, or it could mean tearing down the entire DOM. And that's what's called reconciliation. So that's what the reconciler is, and that's more of what that React magic is. So Fiber is our React reconciler. So here's our daily dose of Fiber now. And actually, you can find more information. We were looking at the file earlier, React/reconciler, and then we were actually looking at React Fiber class component earlier when we were looking at state. So I'm not going to get too much into Fiber or the React reconciler, because you could actually write an entire article about this. So this is the article by Max Koretsky, and you can see it's a 19-minute read. So I could give an entire talk just about Fiber and the React reconciler. And I don't have time for that. So you could actually check out Jen Creighton's talk later, because she actually does a lot of focus on what Fiber is doing and what reconciliation is. So that's Fiber. And speaking of React and Fiber, did you know that React actually has some secrets, like Facebook? So when I was looking at React, earlier, you saw that there is this object, basically, and one of the properties on the object is called secret internals do not use or you will be fired. And I was like, whoa, what is that thing? I don't want to be fired, but I kind of want to know what will get me fired. So you can see here, it's actually assigned this thing called React Shared Internals. So where does React Shared Internals comes from? It comes from this other package called React Shared Internals. So if we go to that file inside of the React package, you can see that there's this thing called React Current Owner and React Debug Current Frame, and inside is a constant called React Shared Internals, which are assigned those two things above. So what are those two things? It turns out that we're actually importing Fiber from React Reconciler, and we're also importing the React Fiber dispatcher from the React Reconciler. So we've gone from React.js to React Shared Internals to React Current Owner to the React Reconciler. And I was like, again? So basically what everything comes down to in React is this thing called the React Reconciler. And inside of the documentation about React Reconciler, they say that React Reconciler is an experimental package for creating custom React renderers. Its API is not as stable as that of React, React Native, or React DOM, and does not follow the common versioning scheme. Use it at your own risk. So basically what you can do here is you can write your own React reconciler. You can completely rewrite it and possibly get fired. So kind of scary, but what I like to say again is that the React reconciler is like where all of the React magic lives. So that's basically all I have for you. The main thing I want to say is that making sure that you do your code spelunking can like really illuminate what you're learning or what you're using on the day-to-day. So I highly encourage you do a bunch of your own code spelunking as well. So you could feel like a cool hacker. And so with my newfound knowledge, I felt like armed and ready to be like using React and taking on the world of React, even if that means saying no to React. So you can see here a screenshot of one of my repositories and someone saying, hey, I rewrote your entire repository in React. And me responding to him and saying, hey, that repository was 250 lines of code and React adds 7,500. So I'm just going to say no to React. Maybe you want to try a different framework like Angular, because that's probably safe, right? I don't know. But basically, this is to say that you should be a little more like ComponentsConf and a little bit less biased towards specific frameworks, but also do your research and making sure you learn more about them. And components. Thank you.
I think we have a little time for questions. There are no questions. That's a question.
Have you done a similar sort of deep dive into Angular or any of the other frameworks to that?
I have one on Ember, actually. It's not so much into the source code, or not as deep into the source code, but more so just on like general concepts around Ember, because they're so different. And actually, we use Angular at Mode, so I'm pretty sure there may be a talk like that coming.
There it is. I knew I saw another hand.
That was a really awesome talk. Loved all the GIFs. It was great.
Thanks.
So did you end up, your whole team going to React at the end of that? Like, did they end up deciding that React was the way to go? And were there lots of components, and was it fun?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they ended up going with React, and the main reason was we were actually switching over. We wanted to switch over to something more modern, but also we were creating a design system. And so the idea of like using components and a design system just made sense, and so that's why we decided to go with it. Come get swag.
Ooh, swag. There's one.
A little bit like old games. This character got stuck in a certain part, like deciding which way to go.
Yeah, I was trapped in the renderer.
Yeah. Just wonder if you have inspiration from any new frameworks, or are you planning to do something on something more niche rather than three mainstream ones?
Mm-hmm. So I tend to talk about myself as being pretty framework and language agnostic, and the reason being is just that I find that there's so much to learn from every framework. Since Mode is in Angular, I think I'm going to stick with Angular to start so I can get a better handle around that. Actually, yesterday I went to Aaron Zimmer's workshop on migrating from AngularJS to Angular, because that's something we're doing at Mode currently. So that's kind of what I'm focused on right now.
Cool, thanks.
There you go. Oh, good. I was worried I'd have to talk. So was everyone else right now.
I'm kind of interested in the actual migration from AngularJS to Angular, actually, because we're also doing this at our company. So, but we're also thinking about whether it's better to migrate from AngularJS to React, because in my opinion, React.js is such a lightweight framework, so it's very easy to migrate. You can just do it in a very progressive manner. Whereas if I want to do from AngularJS to Angular, it's like the whole, basically like all the skeleton that I have to scrap and write from scratch. So I'm just curious about your opinion on this.
So since I don't have a ton of experience with Angular and specifically, especially the migration, like I would definitely recommend talking to Aaron, who's right up here in the red shirt. Sorry to put you on the spot. And I have actually also not migrated an Angular app to a React app, but we did migrate our backbone over to React, and actually we had to do it piecemeal as well. And it wasn't completed before I ended up leaving that company. So in some cases, like even migrating over to React can take quite a bit of time. And I find that in general, migrations do happen piecemeal. So I don't think it's avoidable, I guess, right. Especially with like an older, larger legacy app.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm just curious about, let's say, the process in your company. Let's say if you create a new project, do you use like create React app or something like that, or you just go variable in React and then like manage your webpack by yourself? Because when you use CRA, like when you eject it, like you kind of have to deal with it by yourself later on, but it's just quicker to start up a new project with it. So I'm just curious whether like people actually use CRA in like real project environment.
Mm-hmm. I haven't found that to be the case, actually. So I think it's super helpful for actually bootstrapping personal applications or like smaller applications. But in general, yeah, in my experience, we didn't use it to start new applications at work.
Well, it doesn't look like there's many more questions.
Okay.
We might thank you again.